Welcome to the Telsig podcast. This is Phil Martin from the University of York. I'm joined today by Dev, who's been he's actually a return guest. He's done a previous webinar with his colleague, Dr. Paul Otermans, and they represent Otermans Institute, and they've been doing some cool things with small language models and how these can really augment our teaching and add to sort of things like learning design and the way students conduct their autonomous learning. So I'll put links to everything that we discuss in the show notes underneath. And I'll also refer to the original webinar. So if you'd like to see the presentation in all its graphic glory, resplendent with PowerPoints, please go and watch that first. But we'll make this a sort of standalone conversation, and hopefully everyone who's interested in using AI and cool ways of improving their teaching can use this by itself. Can you start off by giving us a little bit about your background? So your teaching, interest in artificial intelligence, and your pedagogical background, and how did you come to be doing what you're doing at the moment?
Yes, of course. So first of all, Phil, thanks for having me again. It's always good to be back. I really enjoyed the previous webinar we did. So a little bit about my background. Dr. Paul Otermans and myself, we originally started a traditional edtech. And the reason we actually did that was from a marginalized student's point of view. So we had traveled after our university to South Asia. And at that time, we went and we were just teaching in some marginalized schools. But what we found was there was a big gap in the market. There was no sort of skills training being given, and actually they were culling it. So the higher you went, especially in your school education, instead of teaching more transferable skills, etc., they were culling it. And in place of only academic learning. So we saw that was a problem. Then we did a research across 1,300 kilometers, namely in Nepal, India, Bangladesh, these three countries. And we found that this was a problem in about 95% of the schools, and also moving into higher education. So to solve that, in 2020, we launched Otermans Institute. We were human-led then. So we created a content that went on to teach in 13 plus countries. We had human trainers, and it was also the time of the pandemic, if you remember. So not the best time to launch, but we did scale to 9 countries in the first year. While doing that, we faced another problem. We couldn't hire enough teachers and trainers. And on top of that, the quality control issue, no two human beings teaching the same way. So to try and solve that, actually, our own internal problem, we thought we would experiment with AI. And in January of 21, we launched the first version of our AI teacher, which happened to be the first in the world in terms of publicly available, complete digital human teacher. It was successful for us. It went on to teach for UN HCI camps, which they really appreciated. And that's when we really saw the value of this. And in this entire journey, because, we've been covered in research as well for our own previous content, which was called a truly cross-border content, because the same content was being taught for the UK government for NEET learners here. It was being taught in countries like Afghanistan, Malawi. It was being taught in countries like the Philippines and India. So very broad use case without really change. And efficacy and the teaching and learning results were almost identical. So that's essentially the journey. That's why we do the AI teacher. And what we found also in this journey is just giving content doesn't solve the issue. If people have access to a teacher or a mentor, that really helps alleviate a lot of the problems in teaching and learning gaps when the teaching and learning breaks. And that's why our focus is on the AI teacher. In terms of my own background as well, I am an active HCI, human-computer interactions researcher, and AI and education researcher. I also publish in the space. And again, that's probably why we sort of tried with AI first to solve our own problem, and hey, here we are.
Right. So you were involved in this before AI really became something that higher education was talking about on an almost daily basis. You talked a bit about, I think you mentioned this in your webinar actually. I think you mentioned the research you did in South Africa, but you're saying this was quite a much broader project than that, crossing several countries. Can you talk a bit about what you're doing there?
Absolutely. So from our main point of view here, the first training was delivered by human beings, right? And then we transitioned to AI. So very rightly said, our first AI teacher came out in January 21. That's before ChatGPT. And that was essentially when the world started talking about AI. So we were ahead of the curve in that way. In terms of the South Africa study as well, that happened in around September, October of 2021, again, before the tidal wave of AI. And at that time, generative AI was still in its infancy, and you didn't have this ChatGPT moment, etc. So we were using more old school styles of AI, but still getting data points like this. So for instance, in South Africa, 74% people were returning more to the platform because of this AI sort of coach that was the persona there that was supporting them in their learning. And about 75% learners started learning more. The reason for this was they now knew what to learn next after learning one topic because the AI was suggesting that. So these sort of things we have been dabbling with for a very long time. And today we have a content agnostic teacher. What that means is the teacher can teach almost any subject, and it can take your content, digest that and teach it only to your learners. So it's not like a GPT where you don't know exactly where the information is coming from. In our case, you could give it a research paper, your research paper. You could give it your own PowerPoint slides. It will only teach that. When students ask it questions, it will give answers from your documents first. So this entire hallucination problem also goes. And all of this we have been able to develop because we think about building that teacher, not a cool, which is solving real problems that, academics and the sector has. Another problem, again, being, for instance, if you were to put your own research paper, where does the data go? Do you lose your IP? In our case, we only extract to teach. Our model doesn't train on that. So again, that's another angle we had to safeguard for the community, for the, the sector we're in. And that's essentially how we plan and develop every new feature as we go along.
Yeah. So let's and there's a couple of points to cover here. So first of all, we'll do a bit of an exploration of the actual tech and what's going on, because we'll cover a bit of the same ground that was in the webinar and talk about these small language models and how they're constructed. But just to go back to a point that I think was sort of implicit in what you're saying. So we're trying to develop an AI-based teacher that has the kind of qualities of the human that a human teacher can provide, and plugs a gap in provision that students might otherwise be experiencing. What do you see as the value of the human role in teaching? Because I think there was a question in the webinar about MOOCs, and obviously MOOCs infamously, you've got this. Yes, they're autonomous, and there's a distance there that probably contributes to their sort of notoriously high dropout rates. If you just leave a student to their own devices in front of the screen, we tend to see engagement tail off. So with the small language models and with the platform that you've been working with, am I right in thinking you've tried to develop this in such a way that solves some of those problems? So you've got the human element there, albeit done via an AI interface. So first of all, is that an accurate description of what you're doing? And how do you see the value of human teaching as opposed to kind of more autonomous tech-led learning?
Yep, absolutely. So this is an immensely broad area. So I'm going to touch, some of the high-level points here in line with your question. But it goes much broader than anything I can say in the next 5 minutes. So first of all, I think let's start with the MOOC example. Absolutely correct. It's not only that it's an autonomous sort of learning system. The main issue with the MOOC system is left to your own accords, right? So when you are learning, for instance, if you have doubts which inhibit you from progressing in that lesson, there is a lot of resistance there. You have to find the right answer on Google, or read 5 other papers to clear your doubt, then come back, or wait to see your human teacher and clear that doubt, then you can progress, etc. This is an extreme end, but in micro levels also this happens. It just puts you off at that moment in time from learning. So starting just from there to an AI teacher, which can simply just answer your questions correctly, already removes that resistance. Right? Why is this in line with the human likeness, if I have to call it? It's like having a human who is supporting you to learn. Let's not even talk about teaching you, but it's there. A coach is there to support you if you have any kind of doubts and things like that occur while you're learning. That's one. The second thing is, I think a very important factor with other kind of systems is they are all one directional. So when you're learning, you're either trying to take in something from a video, trying to listen to the podcast and take in something to the best of their understanding, or you're reading a paper. AI, especially generative AI-based systems, for the first time is making a two-way conversation. So that, again, automatically makes it human, because at the highest level of generative AI, it is still a prediction machine. It just predicts the next word, right? But for a user, when we interact with the AI system, it makes it completely human-like, because for you, when you're interacting with it, it is talking back. For the first time, you're not communicating with the system in bits or in code, right? And this, again, in itself, by its very nature, makes it a more human-like technology. That has a lot of bonuses. So, for instance, we see on average 4 to 5 questions asked to our AI teacher every hour of conversation in this group. A, you couldn't have that if you were watching videos or reading on a platform. B, now coming to the human teacher part of it actually augments the human teacher ability. It actually increases their productivity, because that data now goes to the human teacher. So they know where I could stumble, where I could as a student have challenges, or where I'm having challenges. I'll give you an example. So I was talking to an academic when we were demoing the product the other day. The academic said, now I know what my students are thinking outside the classroom, because now you can also see the questions they're asking the AI. And going beyond the human likeness as well, when what we have seen is when students talk to an AI system, they actually ask more questions, because they also have that barrier removed. They feel it's a safe space, that shyness falls. So that actually supports that further. In terms of my own prediction till 2030, again, it's not about an AI teacher versus a human teacher. Any kind of AI system today that is built is going to increase the productivity of knowledge workers. Our academics are knowledge workers. So they're going to get more data on the students. They're going to be able to give students two-way conversational learning by just uploading, reading materials, etc. Post 2030, there might be a dramatic shift because the AI market would have matured. At that time, people may be thinking about human versus AI as a choice. At the moment, there is no choice in that. So that's another very, very interesting point to note. So in the current space, any AI teacher, not just ours, is not competing with the human teacher. It is competing with the traditional methods of out of classroom learning, if I have to call it, for instance, which is reading, watching videos, MOOC platforms, LMS platforms, really. It's really changing that game, which is either interactive or accessible. AI for the first time makes learning both interactive and accessible.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because I think this was something that you were, when we were doing the webinar, you slipped in there and you said, you mentioned the date of 2030, and you said it's not going to be competing with teachers until 2030. And I was just thinking, whoa, what happens in, so you've just, you've elaborated on that a little bit. I mean, do you think that, first of all, I'll ask you a little bit about engagement stats and see what data you've come across so far in terms of like, because obviously you're able to monitor student engagement and see how well they're getting on with the AIs and how much time they're spent on the material. But just a quick question on the sort of I guess the motivational aspect of learning, because we know that social construction plays a fairly heavy role in the way we acquire knowledge. We know that tasks, especially tasks with other people, sort of facilitate that ability to incorporate new knowledge into existing. And there is an argument for the classroom environment where you're with either a guide by the side or a sage on the stage, whatever you want to call it, and the students as well, your peers. They really play a role in helping you to absorb your target knowledge. Is that something that even post 2030 you think will still, I guess we're all biased because we're all working in, teaching, learning development, these kind of things. So we love to think that we're irreplaceable in as much a sense as possible. What's your feeling on that? Do you think this is this social construction aspect, there's something about the classroom environment that is irreplaceable, or is there, do you foresee a time where learning could in some sense be entirely autonomous and facilitated by AI?
Very interesting question. I'll just start with some of the data points first.
Yeah, great.
I think that helps, and then I'm going to slightly longer answer to this, which will be slightly historical and philosophical. So some of the data points, right? Everything that is in autonomous learning at the moment, let's talk about MOOCs. You have 7 to 14% conversion rates, give or take. You're only bumping up conversion rates there when you ask somebody to pay a hefty sum and then that certificate for it. That's one of the main instruments used. For AI-enabled teaching, we see upwards of 64% completion rates for minimum 9-hour courses. That is non-compulsory, non-paid. Right? So that's the difference. I already told you 4 to 5 questions asked as well. If you just move out of the teaching space as well, we've already had this before mainstream generative AI. Replica, for instance, 65,000 people had online courses. And this is absolutely recorded. This is pre-ChatGPT. All of these things are going to be further changed and accelerated. So the data is clear. There is a very clear sort of want for this, desire for this. Now going larger for, in the context of the question. A lot of questions need to be answered here. For who? If you're talking about even Gen Z, maybe not that much. Gen Alpha, completely different ballgame. They are growing up in the system. So for them, maybe an actual Gen Alpha right now, or a Gen Alpha who's being born right now, may look at classroom learning as a second-tier option. Because remember, there are pain points here. You need to get to a place, you need to meet that time, you might have traffic, etc. And let me just give you another scope here, and it's not happening that much in Europe, again, because of societal reasons. We like to walk, etc. If you look at India, Indonesia, what we call developing countries, is just not Amazon Prime. Almost everything I can call from my phone, including a matchstick box, and it will come to my house in 30 minutes. So I'm not really going out. Right? You see how these barriers are changing and disappearing. So having said that, would there be a value of the classroom? I think there would be, because we are still social creatures. It would, I think the first shift that would happen is active hybrid options, just like we're seeing in work. You go and see your friends and your classmates once a week, twice a week. That's all you're expected to do. It's not an option for a university now. That is what you're expected to do. You will still be in touch with these other students, but online forums, where you can now deck up the whole place and you can design it as what you want. So those kind of things will happen. And everything is going to be stitched together by AI. So AI is just not generative AI. Everything is going to be stitched together by AI because it has that real-time capability as well. And in essence, this entire Web3 sort of discussion, right? I think AI is the true proponent of it because it's changing the system in which digital works. It's, going away from the traditional X equals to Y approach to a different approach. If I have to literally give 1 minute, half a minute also to this, I'll just give you an example. Traditional digital works like this. You are writing code because you expect an outcome, right? You write code, you expect an outcome. When you write the code, the outcome is just not there. Then you optimize your code until you get that outcome. AI is different. In AI, what do? You write code that plants a tree. You don't really know once that tree, spurs out, whether it's going to have equal number of fruits on the left and the right or not. You see, there is that level of uncertainty, what we call black box in AI. So we need to be prepared for that. And the last question is, is classrooms indispensable? This is where I go a little philosophical and historic here. If I actually just draw a 1,000-year line or a 500-year line, right? How many of us, or even a 150-year line, how many of us, if we were living there, would actually have access to a classroom reading? This every child should be in a classroom is a 50 to 70-year maximum sort of movement. Even if you actually dig deep, it's a 40 to 50-year establishment. And that too in developed countries. In developing countries, they are still missing, whichever data you see, between 100 million to 700 million people who are not actively going to school and classroom. And these people, by the way, that's one of our targets, is a population that might jump the gun. And I'll just end here with giving an example. Because of the wars in Vietnam, etc., they never really got to landline. By the time they started developing again, They skipped the landline and directly jumped into the mobile phone. So this can also happen to these populations who still don't have the classroom. They might just jump directly to all augmented, all digital.
So there's opportunities here for this to be a kind of leveler in terms of making education more accessible, certainly. I mean, is this one of the points that you made in the webinar? You talked about the efficiency of the small language models and that they are much, because of, again, we'll get into the tech of this in a sec, but one of your points that you were making was that they are kind of resource light. Is that fair to say they're not? I think when we're talking about large language models and the training of ChatGPT and things like this, there's a huge cost, both in terms of time, money and energy. And I think you briefly touched on this in the webinar, but do you see these as being more accessible in that sense, that these are cheaper to run and operate?
Yes. If I have to trim everything up, there are two reasons why I think small language models are exciting. The first one is obviously from a cost point of view, it's a given. If something's smaller than something's larger, the smaller one is more efficient. It's absolutely a given, right? But that's actually not why I think small language models are exciting if you are working off of the cloud. From an efficiency standpoint, small language models have the capability, and that's where we are headed to by November this year as well, to run directly on your device, which we call Edge AI. Then is the real breakthrough, because you can optimize your language model to reduce your cost by 10%. That's not exciting. But if I can put that on your device, then the compute happens on your device. I've cut down costs by 80 to 90%. And that cost cut transfers directly to the user. That's exciting. The second reason why I think small language models are very interesting is we need to really understand the large language model space. If you actually look at human beings as well, right? We like to talk and people, and we talk about sports, and we talk about pubs, and we talk about subjects, and we talk about everything. We talk about it. That's our general knowledge. But when you actually go and speak to somebody for advice, for instance, if it's on psychology, you would probably go to a colleague in the psychology department in your university. If you're talking about football, you would probably go to a footballer or pundit or what, right? Small language model, that's the strength. They are extremely good at what they are meant to do and at nothing else. That's the value of small language models. And that can become a bit larger like ourselves. We are only good at teaching. So we can take a subject and teach. We can't write poems, we can't generate pictures, etc. And our performance will be better than large language. So now let's understand large language models. When you have general purpose jobs that do not require a specialist, large language models are the way to go. Because it's a single model that can do anything else. And the last one is, this is a little bit futuristic, but the main companies who are actually building large language models, at least the forerunners there, which is, obviously OpenAI and you've got 01 AI in China, etc. They're actually running towards what we call artificial general intelligence. So they have a slightly different thing. Although their current business model is, we can be the general purpose model for everything, not the specialist, as I just said. They're actually trying to cram all of the world's data together to create a final AGI, which can also reason and do things like that. And to reach that, you need to know everything. So they actually have a very different sort of target. And investors did not realize this. So I'll just give you one example, which investors are realizing now and pulling their hair out, is large language models by default are the fastest depleting asset class. So you paid 100 million, you invested 100 million into a company to build, let's say, GPT 3.5. That same company killed GPT 3.5 in 6 months and launched it. You see, it's a completely different sort of target approach that we. But just coming back to the whole small language thing, it is efficient. We know it can run on edge. That's what we are working hard for and to launch in November as an alpha. If that's done, that's the big, not just having it small. Having it small enough to run on your device. And the second one is specialists always win when you need specialists. That's where small language models are.
Great. Yeah. So I think the specialism was, I think, I'm not right in thinking this was your main argument in the webinar. This is the fact that we can. So I'll try and mangle the paraphrase here of something that your better put explanation in the webinar. But we're talking about training. We as users choose the training data for our small language models. We decide what we want it to be expert in. and we would upload. So in your demo, you looked at a textbook and a particular article. We could upload a single article or a book, or we could upload a reading list. We could upload, if we wanted a sort of dialogical discussion, we can decide, we can set the parameters of our small language model and what we want to teach. And I think or what we want to learn. But you mentioned that I think one of your big cases was this sort of way of approaching learning is less prone to hallucinations than working with large language models to do the same thing.
Let me give you, I think I would be correct to assume that a lot of academics listen to this channel, right? So let me just give you the simplest example, and you probably will be able to get that. So, for instance, if you have Professor X, right, and Professor X has been teaching a class for the last 5 years and has been preparing their question papers for the last 5 years, correct? If I go to a general model and I say, build me a question paper just like Professor X would do, and give me a lesson and a PowerPoint just like Professor X would do, it probably won't get it right. But if you were to create a small language model where the data set is simply this, all of the PowerPoints of Professor X, all of the recorded Pinopto recordings of his lectures of Professor X, and all of the past question papers made by Professor X. Anytime you ask this model to recreate something along those lines, it will be near 100% similar to that step, and it will not hallucinate. So that's the simplest way of explaining it. Now you can remove the data of Professor X and put in a book. You can put in past papers. You can put in anything else. But the more focused you are, and once you've done that initial training, your output will always be that focused.
Right. Okay. So we are, we've got a bespoke, focused set of data which the language model operates within. I think you gave you gave a live demo on this. So again, people who want to see this in action can go back and check that out. Is its strength also? Could it also be a weakness? I mean, we're talking about you upload the data that you want, but this is the language model that you build doesn't have access to the world knowledge, for example. So it simply operates under the assumptions that what you've uploaded to it is the world. Exactly. Is that a limitation?
It's not. So without trying to get too technical, now what we need to discuss is how do you use this technology, right? So any kind of product like ours probably has several models working underneath it. There is a model to motivate the learners, right? There's a model to generate the questions. There is a model to, take your questions. There's a model to create scenario-based questions. They all work cohesively. Each of them is an expert. They're better than a single general model if you put them at that test. Now, again, what you just asked, it's how you structure your product. It's just not about the model, right? It's about how you structure it. So, for instance, let's take that Professor X example again. Let's say you give all of the data of Professor X to teach the model how to generate PowerPoints for lessons, how to generate lecture scripts, and how to generate exam question papers. That's what you taught it. After this, if I connect it to Semantic Scholar, for instance, and then I say, look for a paper on robotics and create me a lesson, a question paper, and a lecture content on that, it will take the information from Semantic Scholar, but the way it will give you the content, which is the PowerPoint, the lecture, and the thing, is going to be exactly in the style of Professor X. You see how we just opened that up?
Right. So it's not an island. It's plugged into the world. Cool. So we had you covered a few bases in the webinar that was basically saying, yes, this is for all people working in higher ed. They've got the primary questions. Is this embeddable? Is it can you stick it in a VLE? Yeah, I mean there will be a lot of people working in higher education who will be concerned, but there's obviously a whole range of other learners. The world does not begin and end with universities. So just talk us through a little bit about how you see the applications here. You see teaching staff working with this and sort of real life examples? I mean, do you use it yourself as a learner?
My team uses it. I make sure they use it.
Nice.
To begin with. Yeah, that always helps. But real life examples, see, if I start from a model point of view, I'll just firstly talk about a little bit on some of the use case we use it on. Right? We obviously have the AI teacher, higher education. It's also providing active training for L&D, learning and development. I'll give an example. You're a corporation, you've got 5,000 employees, 2,000 people in sales across 11 countries. You cannot train them cohesively at all. When they're watching videos, because of the time constraints, they might be watching it at 3x the speed, just downloading a certificate, sending it to each other. So now you can have cohesive kind of training as well, everybody, and track down to the single words. They're having conversations with the AI, and they're anyway having a better lesson experience because it's more engaging. That's another use case. If I take my model out, what we have done is we have plugged it into a product called Teddy AI. This is for 4 to 7 year olds. So at the highest level, simplest way to explain this is, it's a study buddy for children. So it encourages children to study, also has its own games. But the first differentiator here, you and me, when we play a game in level 3, you play the same thing as I do, right? If both of us watch Winnie the Pooh, episode 3, you watch the same thing as I do. In a generative AI game here, you can be playing or talking to Teddy about rainbows. I can be talking to Teddy about shirts at the same time. That's the difference. It's absolutely personalized to anyone. You can do 2 other things here. Why is it good for children? So one of the main gaps for parents is busy parents are very distant from their, especially the early education and development time of their children. They're very distant. So they get to hear it from their nursery, from their school. They get a report card. That's sort of it. In this case, what they can do is they can, using a dashboard, prompt Teddy. So my child, he should say, good morning to everybody. Or from the report card, the child is not doing multiplications well. Please practice the multiplications of 2. They can prompt it on that dashboard. When the child is playing with Teddy, in between playtime, Teddy will be like, hey, let's stop a minute. Let's practice the multiplications of 2. And the child will do it without any sort of barrier because it's not a forced activity. So these are kind of things that you can do with AI. And I think the bottom line of this is, for the first time, at least from a user's perspective, the machine is speaking in human tongue. And now it's about us how we want to use it, because education in itself, be it for children, be it for higher education, be it for lifelong learning, sits on the ability to communicate. It's a communication.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on some really interesting things there. Obviously, I guess just to flesh that out a little bit, how do you see this technology being best? AI in general and specifically the platforms we're talking about today, how can this best be used to make it a sort of tide that lifts all boats? I mean, I think, referring back to the starting point of this, you were really talking about using it to plug gaps, in resource gaps. And I think we are at a moment where the technology can make a lot of people richer, or it can also be used to bring education to places where it wouldn't normally get to. How do you see this sort of being harnessed and distributed, and where really should the technology be targeted so that we can benefit most people?
Yeah, so I'll tell you firstly a little bit about our own targets. Our own sort of mission statement, which we're absolutely strong upon, is we want to upskill 750 million people by 2030. The vast majority of this is from the marginalized communities where we have already served. We cannot scale that immediately because the cost of AI is very high. And that's also one of the reasons why we are ourselves really working hard to get into the edge AI space, because then it becomes really accessible for these people. The lack of having smartphones or internet is a near myth now, because we've taught in Afghanistan, Malawi, etc. That problem is going away at a very, very fast pace. So that's one way you can do it, right? You can finally give education to people who wouldn't have thought that they could have access to it even a year. That's one way. Another one is we've released our AI teacher for a couple of batches now in Palestine. It's to university students, but their entire university system has been decimated overnight. They continued learning with the AI teacher. That's another good way. Another one, for instance, we have built the MVP for it. We don't have the funding to go beyond, so it's parked at the moment. And that's again where demand and supply comes in. So you don't have too much investor appetite. It's a small market. But what we have is a real-time converter of spoken English to British Sign Language. So I could use this technology to now talk to you, or you could release this podcast also with an avatar that is signing. Having access to an avatar like that could be as little as £20 a month. If I was commercially selling it, that's less than half of what a hearing impaired person may have to pay for an hour to get access to a real life translator. And they never have a translator to watch, Netflix or podcasts, etc. And they have a glass ceiling when it comes to online content. So there are so many good things that can come out of it. But I don't want to be an optimist here only. There are also challenges that will come. You're going to have more screen time. People's behavior patterns are going to change. We need to obviously mitigate that. Otherwise, a lot of physiological and mental health related issues is going to come. We've seen that with social media. It's not about AI, it's about screen time, etc. So these sort of things will come. And in terms of people becoming richer and poorer, people will always become richer. And you see, it's also about who can invest more or who's really working hard into this space. But I think the main thing here is AI is not replacing you by 2030. Right? That's what we're saying. You have to actively learn about AI. It's not that difficult to do about AI, not in terms of how to build AI, but how to work with AI. Because the first people who are going to get replaced are the people who do not use AI tools. So people will replace people. People who learn quickly to use AI tools will replace the people who are trying to fight using AI tools. It's like saying, I will still do my math with pen and paper, and a competitor comes with a calculator and takes my job.
The screen time, I think, is an interesting point. I mean, I've been working with digital learning for some time now in various forms, and looking at the cool technologies invariably do involve screens, especially as you were saying earlier. It's a kind of like screens are so ubiquitous. It is the obvious way to democratize education because there's very little cost barrier to them anymore. But it does present an issue with it's a barrier to human interaction in some senses. So it is a very difficult needle to thread. You've got to kind of retain the human interaction element. And as somebody who deals with students in a class with screens, and I also have a young child and trying to control encourage him to learn and not be too screen dependent. I think it's a tough path to navigate. Do you have any thoughts on, I know this isn't particularly your special area of expertise, but what are your thoughts on balancing that at all? Do you envision some sort of strategy for being enhanced by but not dependent on screens?
I'll give you a sort of strong directed answer here. I don't think there is any right answer. I think there are social systems in place. So, for instance, for children, the parents take the first decision. So, if parent X wants very little screen time and wants to take their children out more for hikes, etc., they should do that. Vice versa. Parents should have control over what their children can and cannot do on, screens. That's a tool that they can use, but they should have that control with what their children are doing. Once we turn adults, then it becomes a very messy discussion because, are we telling children to date or not? Are we telling children to this or that or not, etc.? So you need to get into that sphere where society as a whole says whether more than 3 hours of screen time a day is bad or not. Otherwise, it becomes a very difficult situation. I think society usually decides by weighing the whole issue at hand and then saying whether this is a problem we want to live with or not. I'm going a bit pessimistic here. What I mean by that is, with the accessibility to the internet, we've got pornography, we've got the dark web, we've got, people, talking to younger people online, etc., all of these problems. But with the internet, we can now conduct business online, we can talk to our old friends, we can pay digitally, we can book tickets digitally, etc. Society as of now believes internet has more value than the problems. So that's that area. The strong message I have here is this is from an expert point of view. I think the question you're asking is, when your child is growing up, in a couple of years' time, when this AI becomes more and screen time becomes more, what is the right thing to do? I don't think any expert can say that very strongly. They can have hypotheses, and then again, people will believe one person's hypothesis versus the other. And the reason for this is experts know everything about the research that has happened, right? They know everything of the past, trying to predict what will happen in the future. So when I also say post 2030, people might and will start choosing between digital and human, I cannot draw it and tell you exactly how they will do that as well. So an expert can't really tell you that. So we can have our own hypothesis, we need to follow that. And especially for children, I think the guidance and the active decision-making and presence of their parents is very important. But that's the formative years.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I'm conscious now we're approaching the hour mark, so I just wanted to kind of land with a wrap-up question, just to talk to you about your experience as a kind of a tech entrepreneur in a very fast-moving field and a very fast-moving time. This is somewhere where, my knowledge of AI from 6 months ago is out of date. What are your plans now moving forward, and how do you see the general sort of? There seems to be a lot of AI tech platforms starting up. There's a lot of apps, a lot of sites that are they? I guess this is a kind of a sidebar question, but are they using a lot of the same shared technology? Are they using the same similar training data? And where do you see all this going?
Very interesting question. So personally, yes, we are in probably the fastest changing landscape that we have seen. This has happened historically before Industrial Revolution, the rise of the internet, etc. But this is much, much, much faster than any of them. And maybe the next wave, let's say we have the AGI wave or whatever the wave, right? That's going to be faster. But let's just leave that aside. I think now it's so fast. I always try and keep a tab on what's happening new. But because it's so fast, if you keep jumping between what you want to do today to what you want to do next week, you'll never achieve anything. So you need to almost have a 6 months to a year timeline, and you achieve what you set out to achieve anyway. It's still going to be relevant to some people, and that's your market. So that's a very big risk, actually. Fast pace becomes very, very distracting. And fast pace always doesn't mean that what has changed from last week or last month is better. It's just a change. So that's very important. And we cannot often decide whether the change is good or not because we don't have the data or the time to analyze what that, impact is, whether it's a good change or not. The last one is, again, that's where we take pride. We have our own language model and we stack everything on it. That's why we can enable you to safeguard your IP. We don't train on it, etc., etc. But that question is, 95% of the apps that come out today are essentially on top of GPT. So the technology is GPT. They've just wrapped it around. Some other competitors are there. I think Claude being the best example. We have some of Mistral, etc. But most of them are that. And that gives us three main questions. If you don't trust GPT, would you trust them? That's number one. It's a question. It's not a statement. The second point is, how are they actually inherently differentiated, or is it just a UI spin? So that's the second point. The third point is, if they were to win, would you actually end up with really 4 to 7 key players in the world and nothing else? Everybody else is just wearing a mask.
There was a sense of that I got when just trying out this endless parade of new apps and things that, just things that claim to be AI powered. And I think anyone who's involved in technology enhanced learning or technology in general is just you're curious about new products. You try these things. A lot of them you discard, and every now and again you find something that really changes the way you work and changes the way that you do things. And you made this discovery. But I think certainly with the AI wave, it is sort of ratcheted up my skepticism a little bit when I see, I'll mention no names here, but things of quite large providers that have sent you their AI-powered tool, and you just think, well, this is not really doing anything that, as you say, is probably just piggybacking on existing technology and inserting the word AI in there somehow. But
if I may, Phil, I'll just add a little bit here. I know we've got less time, but again, just to clarify this. A lot of people look at AI as ChatGPT. That's the generative AI part, right? Or you're looking at these apps and things like that, which are mostly generative AI. But whenever you're writing on your phone as well, the autofill, that was the earlier generative, and the computer vision, Google Maps, everything's AI, and how they're predicting what you want to buy in Amazon. But the main thing is people say AI and then they look at a product, right? That's not the case. AI is like electricity. So when electricity became mainstay, almost all products that came after that ditched the oil lamp and it became an electric bulb. You ditched the cooler in your basement and you had a fridge in your house, etc. Everything was then powered by electricity. That's what I mean. AI is the next way of. That's what AI is. Now the question here then is, most of these products, will you just have 4 or 7 electric companies in the world? Or will you have 500, of which we could be one, because that's what we are trying to do. But AI in itself is electricity. OpenAI is, General Electric, for instance. And everything else that you see is using that electricity, just with a slight change. So somebody's selling you a red fridge, somebody's selling you a blue fridge, somebody's selling you a green fridge with an additional tray attached to it.
Thanks, Dev. Right, on that note, I'll link to everything that we've chatted about before, and I'll repost some of the links that we've got on the webinar as well. Just as we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to touch on with regard to what you're doing at the moment, or draw anyone's attention to?
I think we are in a very exciting time. If anybody wants to know a little bit more about small language models, about AI in general, they can always email us on founders@oiedu.co.uk. And if you're an academic, an institution, or an educator, if you want to, explore our AI teachers as well, please again, just write to us. We are always open to having this.
Well, brilliant. Well, thank you again for your time. And as I say, links below. And really looking forward to hopefully speak to you again and check in and see how everything's going. And in, who knows, in a year, it's going to be a completely different landscape. Dev, thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for having me.